let me put a very controversial statement out there. The
Mhm.
role of business analysts and improvement specialists is not going to matter if we continue doing what we're doing today. We're simply going to be redundant.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to another episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in each of these episodes, I get the absolute privilege of sitting down with different BPM practitioners. They're from different organizations in different industries, facing different challenges, overcoming different hurdles. And they're also at a different, business process management maturity level, if you could call it that. So they're encountering different things. They're looking at different technology. The future looks different for each of them. And I'm particularly excited about my conversation I've got today with Sandeep Johal. Now, Sandeep is a senior manager at MinterEllison and working in the technology consulting practice. Sandeep has a mind that is looking towards the future, understanding what are the current technologies and what's got business going to look like in the future. So I'm really excited for today. Sandeep, thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me on the show, Daniel.
That's great. So what we might do to begin with is if you can, give our audience a little bit more background or history as to how you first were introduced to business process management, and then take us on a journey leading up to today.
No problems at all. And what a journey it has been, Daniel. Look, I started in business process management from as early as I can possibly remember in my academic career. So
Right.
imagine that. I went into university not really knowing much about, as a 20, in my early 20s or late teens, not really knowing much of what I wanted to do with my life. I
Right.
stumbled into this subject called enterprise architecture.
Mhm.
And I spent 6 months trying to understand what that was. And to be honest, I couldn't at all. So what I did was I got to actually meet some of the lecturers and you got to know a few people in that space. And
Mhm.
somebody dropped the acronym BPM in front of one of our conversations, and I just went, that sounds really interesting because it now combines the technology mindset and the business side of things that I can deal with.
Right.
And that's where the journey began. So from that day onwards, I was hooked. I was entrenched in this world of process improvement, of process visualization. And it's taken me from one, phase to the next, where you first discover what it all means, and it all is fascinating and shiny. And then you go,
Mhm.
well, we need to make this work for us. So
Mhm.
that was the next big step. So getting into the professional side of things, I moved from the academic world to the consulting world. And so when I started my journey in 2008 professionally working in business process management, it all just came together for me from there.
That's great. That's amazing. And I'd imagine that through the consulting role, I know that you've worked at Leonardo, you've worked at PwC, and you would have worked with a range of organizations throughout the world, and high tier organizations, very large organizations. You would have been going in there, understanding, well, what are the challenges, what are they facing currently, and how can we help them around this? And I'd imagine that over this time, over the last 12 or so years, you've seen the business landscape change, where as we move into the future, technology is adapting or evolving at a very rapid rate. We're seeing complete industries getting disrupted by startups. And large organizations are looking to technology, using technology to find their competitive advantage. How can we stay ahead? How can we do business like it hasn't been done before? So let's talk about the future of business process management, and what are some trends that you're recognizing or noticing currently? And I guess, how have you seen it evolve over the last 10, 12 years?
Daniel, the future of BPM is amazing, more than ever before. So COVID-19 has shown us that process does tend to govern a lot of things.
Right.
The ability to change rapidly, the ability to uplift stay at home or work from home capability, all of that had an underlying process side of things. So if it wasn't clear for companies and large organizations before, it is certainly very clear today. Now, going
Yes.
forward, the world looks very digital. I mean, this is something that all of us know and recognize. But let me put a very controversial statement out there. The role of business analysts and improvement specialists is not going to matter if we continue doing what we're doing today. We're simply going to be redundant.
Right.
Because the way the world's changing, the way processes are changing, everybody's going into automation. And if you combine automation with machine learning, with artificial intelligence, then you have a recipe for self-correction. You have a recipe for self-correction.
Right.
And the only thing that we can look at is from a human side of things, which will be how we'll keep ourselves relevant. But from a process side of things, current technologies such as process mining and automation and all the workflow automation tools that we see out there, we will certainly see a lot of self-correction. And if that's the case, then we can focus on the human side of things, and our roles will be different. How do we take the humans on that new and a fresh process journey? So I think the future is an excellent, it has positioned, or at least today has positioned us really well for how I think some of these technologies will unfold. What we're also seeing is that a lot of organizations tend to want to bring back the RPA, robotic process automation, into their organizations. Now, robotic process automation, as most of our listeners I'm sure are aware, is all about making sure that we have a layer of automation on top of existing applications. So sort of a automated middleware, if you must.
Right.
What we're seeing is that intelligent RPA being more and more prevalent as we go forward.
Right.
So the trend of actually utilizing intelligence in process automation and mining and continuous correction, I think that is a great recipe for the future of BPM. Now, when it comes to keeping our roles as process professionals relevant, we really do need to focus on the softer side of process management.
Right.
So, making sure that we're making decisions correctly. So again, decision making is also a lot of it will be automated going forward. I think it's a case of ensuring that that human beings will continue to be productive in interacting and complementing and using that technology to boost us forward and keep us going towards, again, at the end of the day, we're improving. We're trying to get better. We're trying to get more value from the same, I guess, pool of resources or funds.
Yes.
So I think
Right.
that's where I think things are heading. I certainly see that with a lot of the companies that are up and coming. So there are a number of startups that we are aware of that focus in on this automation side of things. The thing I think right now that I'm seeing as a very relevant skill set is to identify which processes need to be automated.
Right.
So it's not just about not just about plugging in some numbers in a spreadsheet, but actually understanding the nuances of why these processes are good candidates for automation. So an example I can share with you is that a client of ours, a large hedge fund that we worked for, was looking to automate a number of processes across their organization, but they were looking to introduce a Appian into the mix. So they had looked at how they were going to automate processes, and very traditionally they looked at 8 categories and I can't remember all of the categories off the top of my head, but one of those would include things like, how often are these processes being performed? How is it valuable for these processes to be performed remotely, and so on and so forth. So if a process was ticking all the right boxes and had high weightage in those 8 categories, it automatically became a good candidate for automation. Now, that's the traditional way of doing things, but in a lot of ways, there are, just by blanketing a process to say, it's everything can be automated, is a bit naive, I think. And that's where I think we as human beings can bring that nuance of why a process or part of the process should or should not be automated. And I think the other thing I want to add is that a lot of companies, especially process modeling vendors, are looking to get into process mining, for instance. And that's about using data in a process to ensure that you can make decisions and understand how well your process is going. And that makes absolutely 100% sense. And we should definitely look into that. But there is one little caveat there, that is the process needs to be on a system. So if you're performing 80% of that process by hand or manually or off system, it's going to be very difficult for process mining to bring up any nuances. So again, as we move to that 80-90% automation of any process, we will find that the challenges will change in the future.
Yes, that's a great point. And I think that organizations that, as new technology is being used by different organizations, we sometimes can get people or organizations being a bit like copycats. They'll look at another organization, they'll see what they're using, or they'll hear about it, or through a conversation at the bar, it'll come up, and all of a sudden they're like, we need to implement this technology into our organization, but potentially different. They're different size organizations. They got different culture. They've got different leadership. There's a number of different things that makes those two organizations very different. But have you seen that? Have you seen organizations that'll jump onto technology or jump onto trends without making sure that they've got the foundations in place?
Absolutely. That's why when you go into large firms these days and you ask them for a list of all the applications, or if you ask them for a simple, nothing is simple in an application architecture, but if you ask them for the application architecture, they'll proudly present to you a 250 applications, 3 or 4 of them doing the same thing sometimes. Okay. So it's not uncommon to see that. Mm-hmm. And if you talk to the people involved in making those decisions, they have absolutely solid foundations as to why they make those decisions. And when you think about it, you go, right, if I was in their position and if I was trying to get something done quickly, or if I had a need that's so niche to my requirement that the enterprise level solution cannot resolve it, then I'll jump onto that software. I mean, it'll make my life easier. I've got a day job. I don't need to be bogged down by technology. I want it to be an enabler, not an area. It's not my hobby. It's an enabler. So I totally get where executives come from when they do want to implement this. A lot of organizations try to resolve that by having good enterprise architects that can actually look at situations like this and suss it out and actually go through a proper process of ensuring that this is not a duplication and this is not just an impulse buy. So I think that there are checks and balances in place, but like I said, the sometimes requirements are so niche that it's sometimes inevitable. So I find that the responses from a lot of software vendors is to now offer more and more. Right. So I don't think you've ever heard of a software company offering less and less. They'll always expand their offering. If they used to do just process modeling tools, they're in process mining. They will go into automation, workflow, and the list goes on. And same thing for, well, I'm not sure if you've heard of a company called SAP that just started at a much smaller scope, but now pretty much covers everything that you can possibly think of.
Yes.
So given that's the case, that's the trend that we're seeing, that the applications are offering more and more. Now, we have seen a slight turn from that. So we've gone back to the startups that say we'll offer you niche solutions for that particular requirement.
Right.
So if you want a time sheeting solution, here's a, Concur, for example, is an SAP product, but they can go and then go, you can do a standalone implementation of this. So now this is becoming popular. And that's one of the reasons why there's a rise in the RPA world, which is to bring all of these systems together. So I guess going forward, if we have solutions that'll bring together a solution, a middleware, for the lack of a better term, but a middle space like an automation tool, they'll bring together all these applications and data, then technically it shouldn't matter. But the reality is that it becomes very confusing, and it is still a journey. And
yes.
and even in a lot of organizations, I've seen people do tell me that it is a pain, and it is something that they're trying to solve. And you'll see all forms of consolidation exercises happening in organizations, rationalization, and so on and so forth, but also massive implementations, because the Oracles, the SAPs of the world are still not stopping from doing massive implementations, which will actually make a lot of these legacy systems or disparate legacy systems obsolete.
Yes, right. And for someone listening right now that they're hearing you talk about different technologies and what the future is going to look like, but maybe they're in an organization where they've never really put the time, effort, and energy into understanding their business processes and going about improving them. Or maybe they did try it 2, 3, 5 years ago, but all they did was document or model out their processes but they did nothing with them. Moving into 2021, where for that organization that they're still at a very low maturity level, where should they be spending their time, effort, and energy? Where do you begin the journey? And I think you've mentioned that obviously identifying what are the critical processes or what are the really important processes. But can you talk to us a little bit more about that? Where should organizations be pointing their time, effort, and energy?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's certainly a broad. There are a lot of areas where energy can be focused on, and again, it would depend, of course, on the culture, the journey of where they're at, and some of the constraints or environmental impacts that they currently are facing, and so on and so forth. So that's and from my perspective, it's all about making sure that you have a purpose for documenting processes. So I feel like documentation of processes, I've seen initiatives where that was the sole goal, that if you build it, they will come. So if we have process models in place, improvement will just happen. People will just organically use that material and know what to do with it. So with a lot of that documentation, there has to be a clear purpose. And I'm sure this is, in theory, you would have nobody disagreeing with this, but it needs to be an enterprise-wide purpose. So it has to be solving some kind of problem. Mm-hmm. Now, it's a bit of I've had many conversations in the past about, is it even worthwhile doing an as is, for example, of your processes, when you're only going to get a big Oracle system or an SAP system doing processes, doing system-based activities differently going forward. And this is an age-old problem. If I can share a story, I was in Papua New Guinea doing some work for a client, and we were at the point where the implementation, it was an ERP implementation, was, the phase 1 was going live 2 or 3 days prior. Well, it was 2 or 3 days after I had arrived in PNG. So big moment, lots of people looking forward to this new system. They've heard about it for a couple of years. so there's a lot of excitement, also a lot of apprehension and so on. So on the first day when the thing went live, it was very interesting because I was in the room with the people who were actually going to use the system, and they were not completely aware of how they currently do the process. So they weren't quite aware of how the process was going to change or be better for them going forward. So we actually did an as-is workshop on the fly. Now,
Right.
and this is a particular project where it was very clear that a current state was not really required. We just go, let's just go into the 2B. It's too expensive to do an as is and so on. So, but this is the thing. We spent a couple of weeks, 3 weeks in total, trying to communicate the as is and then the difference to the 2B. So I think that's a very strong case for documentation. It's a communication. A very strong point would be a communication factor. If anything, it'll bring people together. It'll give a common understanding for people to do any kind of decision making, improvement, modification, training, whatever it may be. So I think just simply documenting processes is not a good use of time and resources, but documenting for the purposes of an implementation, documenting for the purposes of bringing people together, and documenting for the purposes of making decisions going forward, that I think makes a lot of sense.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's really important to understand what your baseline is. So where are you? What are your current processes? And then from there, you are able to identify, well, how can we tweak this? How can we or radically innovate the way we're doing this? And I think that's another important or interesting topic I'd love to hear your thoughts around, is that, I guess, that balance between incremental improvement versus radical innovation, because I think it's and I could be wrong, but I feel like it's easier for an organization to identify pain points and problems and how can we fix this, and maybe provide band-aid solutions, as opposed to looking to the future. How can we create the future? How can we radically innovate, or how can we create a way of delivering value that hasn't been done before? Because obviously, if you've got pain points and you're feeling the pain, then you want to fix those pain. And so I feel like that's where attention is directed. But talk to us about that balance between when have you tweaked a process? When are you focusing too much on tweaking a process, and when should innovation play a part?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's if we had a solid answer for it, we would be doing the world a great favor, because this is that subtle balance of I guess visionary transformational change and the incremental day-to-day operational change. So I think we need to look at it from these two buckets, I suppose. One, for me, the transformational visionary change is something we want to use to remind our team, our people, our stakeholders that the direction is that way.
Right.
And we would use the incremental changes to solve problems on the ground every day, because believe it or not, we're not transforming daily. Goodness me, that would be very painful and would be expensive, and it would reduce morale to a very low level. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. But at the same time, we're actively saying that our transformational change will happen in 3 to 5 years. And then you can see this in a lot of strategic documents where visionary plans put together, be it because of a government constraint or regulation or just disruption from the from industry. So you focus on the big change going forward, but on a day-to-day incremental change needs to happen as you're tweaking the process, knowing that you have an aim. So if the tweak does not necessarily lend itself to that transformational change. I don't think that we should be we should be definitely examining it and questioning it further. For those that lend themselves to the vision going forward, I would definitely be very inclined to encourage those. If I can share with you an example, we've done projects in the past where a department will say we need to reduce our operating finances or budget or spend by 30%. And that's sometimes a reality because of COVID, but also everyone wants to do more with less.
Yes, right.
So the reality is that money, that we're going in that direction, but that requires a combination of incremental and transformational change, and requires an investment. So if we say that, we're gonna look at this and be $30 million cheaper in 3 years, well, we can't put a one-stop transformational change that will fix it all. We need to start incrementally and make our way up there. So the things that we can change, look at our resources, the three same all things that we've all been looking at: people, process, technology, and data. So we're looking at did I say 4? I mean, you know what I meant. The 4. So I think, so from my perspective, that's where I think the dynamic interdependency between transformational and incremental change.
Yeah, that's great. That's good. And you were talking about, their, I guess, different objectives or goals that an organization may have. But do you have any, I guess, specific examples that come to mind where an organization adopted BPM or they identified a process and incrementally improved it, or on the other hand, that there is a radical innovation that took place? But do you have an example where an organization has, I guess, invested time, effort, energy into understanding, managing, improving their processes, and it's delivered huge value to the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. And value. So I'll just preface that with the fact that value can be interpreted in many different ways. Sometimes what I've seen organizations that embark on this, especially those that are new in the journey of process management, often find themselves improving processes even when they're trying to do a discovery workshop. So there could be people in the room going, "Oh, I didn't know that you didn't send me that document for approval," or something like that. And sometimes it's little, and that itself has already improved the process. So really, and that goes back to my earlier point, which is, if your viewers are not convinced about as-is process modeling, here's another important point: you actually start improving as soon as you discuss the as-is.
Right.
I think we've seen small improvements like that happen. We've seen a case of bigger improvements that are usually driven by system implementation. So we were working with a Victorian government entity, a state entity that looked at how their complaints process was being managed currently. And they said, well, we want to improve that because it's part of our strategic direction, which is to interact directly with our customers and increase that intimacy, and also increase or decrease the time taken to respond to complaints. And these complaints were sometimes quite major ones that could ultimately lead to lawsuits and so on. So they needed to be vigilant, they needed to be aware, so both sides, and they needed to follow up quickly. So this was driven by a strategic direction of being more community engaged, and then they thought of putting in a system to help them improve that process, because currently it was very manual. Drop this in a suggestion box somewhere, someone will pick that up at the end of the day perhaps, and then distribute it, and there's a whole manual process. But now it's online, it's system based, and and as a customer, you're constantly informed about how your complaint or inquiries is traveling through the process. So there's a lot of transparency in that respect. So I think that sort of direction of improvement that happens at a more strategic level, and then that trickles down to the actual implementation, and then those other initiatives where we're fundamentally going into the build it and they'll come. I think we should stay away from those sorts of initiatives and probably focus a little bit more that are strategically driven. You'll find that they'll be heaps more successful too.
Yes, that's great. And I think it's important that in that example that you gave us, then it's important to make sure that there is an outcome, or there is the greater purpose, there is the greater why are we doing this, and that you are seeing outcome and not just output, because I think in COVID has exposed a lot of organizations, or exposed a lot of programs or projects in particular, where the organization can no longer do everything that they were doing, whether that's because they've had to lay off staff, or whether it's because the location has changed, everyone's working remotely now, whatever it may be. There's been some, I know one huge telco, for example, that they had 168 programs of work or thereabouts, and they had to reduce that. They cut it all down to 20 because they identified that, well, these 20 programs of work, they're actually delivering value. The other 148, when it comes down to it, when we actually critique it and look into it, they're not actually delivering the value that is worth all that time, effort, and energy. So I think that we do need to focus on the outcomes. Where is the value being delivered to the organization? What's the real commercial value here? And to your point earlier, whatever that value may be, value can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So for those people that are listening right now and they've been learning more about business process management and I guess technology, what does the future look like? And I'm sure that you've sparked a lot of ideas, and they're going to bring it back to their team. It's going to spark conversations. Where is our organization at, and what should we be focusing on now? But for someone that's learning about BPM for the first time, or they're still maybe not the first time, but they're still learning about it, where would you advise or encourage that person to go to learn more about this topic?
Yeah, look, it's a very universal topic, I think, and for there are definitely some good books out there. No shortage of good books. I can definitely share the textbook that I use. I think from a foundational perspective, it's a book by Paul Harmon. So look that one up. You can just look it up online from BP Trends. And there are a couple of other so-called they are textbooks. I wonder if they're still used in universities or not, but certainly a number of textbooks, business process management, the third wave or something like that, I think it's called, and a couple other really good websites across the board. And there's a website called Business Rules. You can get into that, and that'll explain a little bit more about some of the elements of or different ways to represent processes. I think that's always good. So I guess in a nutshell, the thing the advice I guess I would give for somebody who's starting off in that journey of BPM is to identify what excites them about the field. So I think a breadth, have a look at the breadth of stuff that's within BPM, and then pick something that excites you. And that's how I got into it too. And maybe unpack that a bit more. And that could be there would be heaps of information online that'll go into details of it. Say, for example, if you're interested in process modeling, go and look up the notations and have a look at the guys the open group that actually looks at notations and make sure that you're across some of those notations, and try to use them. And then from there, what you'll find organically is that you'll start building out your interest, and you'll find something. And this is the very nature of any kind of process, right? You'll find the dependencies that you'll want to unpack. So I think that's a great way to expand and get into the field. But yeah, for me, it was, if I recall, it was mainly around the being a conduit or being a bridge between the technology world and the business world. That really appealed to me, and from there, BPM unrolled and unraveled itself.
Yes, yeah, that's great. And for the guys that are listening right now, if you are a business analyst, I just want to, I guess, point back to Sandeep's, one of Sandeep's earlier points, that if you're a business analyst, your role is changing, with new technology and a business landscape that is constantly evolving and adapting, your role will change. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest takeaways for me from this conversation, is that you've got to be aware of what skills will be required in the future, because that might mean that you need to adapt, you need to learn new things. As businesses evolve, your role is going to evolve, and business is going to continually look different into the future. But Sandeep, I just want to thank you for sitting down and sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with us. I think it's always a pleasure to be able to sit down with someone that has such a history, or extensive history, and not just in one organization, but as a consultant working with many different organizations. And I think that's we've been able to learn a lot from you, despite it being 35 minutes. We can only scrape the surface. But I just want to thank you for taking the time and sitting down with us today.
Thank you, Daniel. This was a pleasure. Thanks for having me on your show.